want to start off by thanking the Apostle Islands Historic Preservation Conservancy for sponsoring tonight's program. And it's really a thrill to talk about R.D. Pike today, on R.D. Pike Day, with so many of his descendants here in the audience. And I hope you enjoy the program. Now, R.D. Pike is a fascinating historical figure who lived a life full of achievement. He had an outsized impact on Bayfield from the time that he returned to Bayfield after serving in the Union Army in 1866 to the time he died in 1906. Eleanor Knight wrote, "Captain Robinson Derling Pike is the outstanding citizen of Bayfield's first century." And Miss Knight knew what she was talking about. She received the Merit of Achievement from the Wisconsin Historical Society, recognizing her knowledge and her effort to convey the history of the Bayfield area. And when you delve into R.D. Pike's life, you reach the inescapable conclusion that she was absolutely right when she identified him as the outstanding citizen. The story of Pike's achievements and his impact on Bayfield in the second half of the 19th century is well told by the exhibit. I hope you all go see it. My presentation is intended to complement, not repeat that exhibit. What I will do is I will try to approach R.D. from a couple different angles. First, I will focus on his life as a lumberman and as the owner of the Little Daisy Sawmill, using that aspect, hopefully, as a portal so we can identify the personal characteristics that really were fundamental to his success in his various business ventures. Second, we'll explore what remains of Pike. If we ignore his military history, we ignore his success as a businessman, we ignore what he did as an entrepreneur. And we'll do that primarily by looking at him through the eyes of a woman named Nelly Tate. And my hope is that at the conclusion of this talk, you don't really know much more about what R.D. Pike did, but hopefully you know a little bit more about who R.D. Pike was. Now, first, for those who may not know much about R.D. Pike right now, I want to just go through a brief chronology of his activities in Bayfield after he returned from serving in the Union Army in the Civil War. So in 1866, he was honorably discharged. He bought a shingle mill with another individual at La Point on Madeline Island. It burned down. In 1867, he built his own shingle mill here in Bayfield. It exploded. In 1869, he built a shingle mill and a sawmill that would become Little Daisy, and it began operating in 1870. In 1870-71, he established the Superior Wagon Trail, about a 70-mile trail from Bayfield to Superior. In 1872, he sold Lake Superior ice to Chicago. At that point, Lake Superior was for sale. He sold about 20,000 tons of it to Chicago. He was elected to the highest position in Bayfield government, town sheriff, and he was also elected captain of the Bayfield Rifles. In 1876, he began manufacturing fish barrels. In 1877, he constructs his own fish hatchery. In 1882, with William Knight, he establishes a telephone line between Bayfield and Ashland. In 1883, because he didn't have enough to do already, he opened a quarry in Sawmill, a brownstone quarry. In 1885, he built his home. Now, it was not Pinehurst. It was the Pillar House. The Sandstroms recently donated the plans from the house when it was built, and it clearly identifies it as the Pillar House. And in 1866, he got married and began his family. In 1877, 1887, he brought electricity to Bayfield, erecting the first electric streetlight at the corner of 2nd Street and Rittenhouse. And in 1892, he proposes the extension of the highway from Bayfield to his home near Pikes Bay. With that background in mind, let's see what we can learn about Pike by exploring in some detail his work as a lumberman and as the owner of the Little Daisy Sawmill. Pike came to Bayfield in 1855 at the age of 17. His father, Elijah Pike, had 1 year earlier come to the area and purchased an abandoned lumber mill from the North American Fur Company. It was situated along Pike Street, and it was there that Elijah built the family's cabin and established the family's homestead. Pike worked at the mill with his father, worked for about 7 years until he actually went and enlisted in the Union Army as an infantryman to fight in the Civil War. In the 1860 census, Pike was listed as a lumberman with a net worth of $1,000. Elijah's sawmill, when everything was working right, could produce about 4,000 feet of lumber in a day. Keep that number in mind. On March 2nd, 1865, about 5 weeks before the Civil War ended, Pike received his commission as a first lieutenant. On that same day, he re-enlisted in the Union Army for another 3-year period. And I found that curious as I thought about it. Was he at that time thinking about making the military his career? I don't know. But about 1 year later, about half of Pike's brigade, including Artie Pike, were mustered out of the service in the Utah Territory where they were then serving. Then Pike returned to Bayfield. Now, Eleanor Wright, she was really a great historian, and her book I recommend to everybody. But I'm going to start off by disagreeing with a couple of things that she said. Eleanor Knight wrote, "There can be no explanation for why he, Artie Pike, came back to Bayfield other than that he loved this place." She noted that he had been born in the East, he had seen most of the country through his military service, and that he still chose to return to Bayfield. She stated that his father, Elijah, did not need his help with the little sawmill, and Captain Pike went into business for himself. Bayfield offered no great financial opportunities. Now, Artie's life provides ample evidence that he loved this place, but I doubt that it was the only reason he returned to Bayfield. His parents lived in Bayfield, and I think that mattered a lot to him. 19 years after he returned, he would build his house in Sawmill, a few miles outside of Bayfield. He was then wealthy. He could have built his home anywhere, but he chose to build it in a place that was somewhat inconvenient because it was not easy to get to Sawmill at that time. He chose to build it on the family homestead. Later, he was even more wealthy. He could have lived in the upper crust of Milwaukee or Chicago. He loved progress. He loved technological advancement. He loved electricity. He loved all the things that progress was bringing. But he chose to stay in Bayfield instead. He brought electricity to Bayfield and then paid for the cost of running that electric line from Bayfield to his home. Now, Pike's hometown was always Bayfield. His home was always the pillars in Sawmill. That never changed. I believe that he did love Bayfield in the sense generally but I think he loved that homestead in particular. Even at a young age, even when he was just leaving the Army, I believe he felt a special connection to that land. The area bore his family's name, Pikes Creek, Pikes Bay. It was here that his family had made its mark. This was Pike land, and Pike wanted to live here. Based on his life story, I think there is zero chance that Pike felt that Bayfield offered zero financial opportunities to him when he returned. I think he knew that. I just don't think there's any chance that he felt that way. Pike was a man with a plan. He made things happen. Life did not happen to him. I think you see that in his military service. When you review Pike's life, do you think there's any chance that he would have been satisfied being a member of the infantry, one of 100 brave men doing a frontal assault on a Confederate line? Or do you think he was better suited for the cavalry, where he could have at least some more control over his own destiny, where he could survive by moving quick, by riding the horse hard, by tactics? Not only did Pike transfer from the infantry to the cavalry, he also changed, and it was clear it was of his own volition, to a different company within the cavalry. Pike knew where he wanted to be, and he went there. When you walk through the exhibit and you absorb his life story, Pike emerges as an ambitious man, bold and confident in his abilities. He's repeatedly described as a man who moved fast, who drove his horses hard. His son Robert, in a draft memoir he put together, recalled he used to drive to town with a big bay gelding named Prince. And all the way to town, he would be hollering, "Step along, Prince, step along." Artie Pike was an energy with one gear. Pike was an engine with one gear, forward. He had no neutral, and he certainly had no reverse. For Pike, Bayfield was a land of opportunity, and the opportunity resided in the forests of the area. Curry Bell wrote, after visiting a lumber camp in 1889, that one would almost imagine that there was enough lumber on those skidways to build a house over the universe. Imagine that the wealth that those forests contained more than 20 years earlier when Pike returned to Bayfield after serving in the Army. Now, none of this would have been a surprise to Pike. He understood what the forests offered. He was a lumberman. His father had operated a mill for a decade, and Artie Pike had worked in that mill. He saw the raw resource of trees transformed into a marketable product, a product for which there seemed to be insatiable demand. He was so certain of his future and where it actually lay that he was undeterred by the fact that his first two ventures in lumbering literally burned and exploded. Pike stumbled out of the gate, but his pursuit of this opportunity, the area's force, did not waver in the least. Pike began to get his footing when he built the sawmill and plating mill in 1869. And as I've already mentioned, the sawmill is famously called Little Daisy. You may ask, why Little Daisy? I will respond, I have no idea. Now, the Little Daisy, when it began running in 1870, produced 10,000 feet of lumber per day, 2.5 times what his father's mill had turned out. 10 years later, Little Daisy produced as much as 80,000 board feet of lumber per day. In 1890, Little Daisy produced more than 12,200,000 board feet of lumber. Now, a board feet equals a piece of lumber 1 foot square and 1 inch thick. This means, according to my computation, that you could lay 2x4 boards 3,450 miles with the lumber that this mill produced in 1 year. Now, how did Pike increase the production of Little Daisy by such a prodigious amount? As we will see when we review the Sandboard maps, the footprint of the mill never increased. So this increase in production wasn't due to some big expansion project. Instead, it was always stated about Pike's mill that it wasn't the biggest mill around, but it was the smartest. Pike embraced progress. He loved new machines and new things. Curry Bell wrote, and if you know where Curry Bell was the editor of the newspaper, Curry Bell wrote, as is well known, Pike is progressive in his ideas and is always on the lookout for the best and latest improvements for his mill. And it's interesting, you know, the pride that Bayfield took in the mill. The newspaper contains many reports about the mill's accomplishments and what's going on at the mill. And there's articles about the new machinery that Pike brought in to increase the efficiency of the mill. One year, it was reported that Pike installed a new boiler and a new machine to turn the logs, each of which were expected to increase production by 8%. He also got a new Resaw, which was a machine that helped him trim the lumber and edge it more efficiently. Pike even invented a machine for the efficient production of siding. So the mill is an example, I believe, of someone's commitment to continuous progress, continuous improvement of an asset to ensure that it is working at peak capacity. But the increase in production wasn't due solely to the new machines that he put in. Little Daisy was rarely idle. It was noted that Pike kept the mill running day and night and for long seasons. I'll just read one thing here from Eleanor Pike's book, which is something from the newspaper. In 1890, Little Daisy had the honor of being the first mill to open the season on the bay, starting about April 13, and it was not until November 8, the press said, Pike's Mill, Little Daisy, met its first breakdown of any consequence for this season. It ran for 6 months and 2 days without stopping, except for 1 or 2 holidays. The average cut has been over 70,000 feet per day. And this is significant when it is remembered that this is a single circular saw with 2 resaws, having no gang saw or bandsaw. The record is something to be proud of, and Bayfield was proud of it. The mill did not shut down that year until December. No doubt, the mill was assisted in its ability to run day and night by the installation of electric lights. And they may be hard to see, but that's what's circled up there. Those are the electric lights that were installed in the mill. I suspect that when Pike brought electricity to Bayfield and put up that first street light at Second and Rittenhouse, he had some other ideas about how he wanted to utilize that electricity. It was estimated in 1889 that not less than 150 men and boys worked at Little Daisy. And they worked hard, evidently harder than they wished. On May 2nd, 1886, it was reported that the workers at the mill briefly went on strike. Curry Bell's report about the strike reflects an attitude to employee interests at that time, which may seem a little bit jarring to us today, but here's what Curry Bell wrote. Bayfield reveled in the delightful sensation of a strike this week, the participants being the employees of Captain Pike's mill. The men demanded 10-hour days, $1.75 as pay, all of which was refused. On Wednesday, the strike was abandoned and the mill started up full-handed. I don't know what Pike's men were paid, but I took a look and the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis reported that the average pay for laborers at that time was 13 cents an hour. Now, I've talked about the pride that Bayfield took in the Little Daisy Mill. And these photos are two things. The one on the right there, my right, is a postcard. And then the one on the other side is a stereoscope card, something that you look through in a viewfinder. And I think these photos are important because they demonstrate how intertwined Bayfield and Little Daisy had become. And that when people talked about Bayfield and wanted to talk about what a great and interesting place it was, what they wanted to show people was the Little Daisy Mill. Here's the bird's eye map of Bayfield from 1886. Per square inch, I don't think there's any document that has as much information about Bayfield's history than this map. It is fascinating. And we'll use it to explore a little bit what the Little Daisy Mill was like in 1886. Here's a blow-up of the map. And here we see a depiction of the mill. Right there we see the main mill. There's the planing mill. There's the elevated tram that was constructed. A tram that was used to move the lumber to either be stacked on piles or to ships so that they could be taken to other markets. An elevated tram was built. 2 docks that were there to service, to make sure that the lumber got where it was needed. That was an impressive operation. Here is the Sandboard Map for that same year. And you can see depicted on this in yellow, that's the tramway. All the places the tramways went to move that lumber and to service the 2 docks right there. And I'm putting up the Sandboard maps, not so much to go over the maps in detail, but to show the changes that R.D. Pike made to the Little Daisy Mill over a 6-year period. Those changes, I believe, show Pike's drive to maximize what he could get out of the Little Daisy Mill, to maximize his ability to profit from taking advantage of the area's forests. I believe it shows his attitude that good enough was never quite good enough for him. So here's what we see in 1892. New docks, 3 boat slips, expansion of the lumber yard to a completely new area. And this area was covered with stacks of lumber. Take a look at the mill. The mill's not any bigger, okay? Like I said, he's producing more out of the same mill. That little dock before it looked pretty impressive. It's now been extended by 500 feet. he put an incredible investment in the infrastructure that was serving the mill and able to efficiently process all of the lumber that it was creating. And here's a side-by-side comparison that may help a little bit too in making that comparison. Now, this type of investment, which was substantial, was, I'm sure, not always easy. Eleanor Knight, writes that on one occasion, Pike did not have sufficient money to pay his men, so he gave them script. And she noted that it was real, and it's correct, it was a testament to Pike that the merchants had so much confidence in his ability to later repay that they accepted that script without question. Pike had also created an integrated enterprise. He owned the mill, but he also owned timberland. He did logging. He had purchased ships so that he could do his own shipping and take his product directly to market. He had a wholesale and a retail sales operation. In sum, the Little Daisy Mill shows that Pike was progressive, he was determined, he was demanding, forward-thinking, and he was focused on continued improvement. Now, as an aside, when I look at things like this, when I look at this mill, and when I think about how incredibly different Bayfield 125 years ago was from today, when Bayfield was an industrial center, I know in my mind that a lumber mill was located there, but I don't think I really appreciated what it might have been like. So if you're like me, let me make a suggestion. The next time you're at the Ace Hardware parking lot, close your eyes and imagine that you're smelling the aroma of freshly cut lumber. You're here, you smell sawdust. You may smell a tinge of smoke from the boiler. And when you're standing there, you're surrounded by a cacophony of noise generated by the work activity of over 100 people. You may hear the saws cutting through the logs, the chains clanking and knocking through picking up the logs and moving them. You may hear the noise of men stacking the lumber on huge stacks. You may hear the tram rolling by carrying product. And when you look south, you can see to your right, you can see the lumber mill. And when you look ahead, you see lumber. Huge stacks of lumber. Lumber taller than you are, across the horizon. You don't see the lake. You see piles and stacks of lumber. And if you look over the lumber, you might see some mass of sailboats, maybe a smokestack from a boat. And when you got your eyes closed, if you take yourself away from the environment, where you ride down Rittenhouse and you slow down because you want to see what progress has been made on the new St. James Hotel, and instead put yourself in an environment where elevated tramways are being constructed, they're being extended, new docks are being constructed. A dock is being extended 500 feet. And those things are not docking worthy. Those things are the stuff of everyday life for Bayfield 125 years ago. And then you open your eyes and you count. You count the number of people that are gawking at you, wondering why you are standing in the parking lot of Ace Hardware with your eyes closed. Okay? But enough of that. Now, as the early chronology showed, Pike was involved in many activities, but the sawmill was the foundation of his business enterprise. Only after that business was established that Pike seemed to feel that he had the freedom to explore other things and begin to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Remember, he built his home and got married when he was in his late 40s. By that time, he had been operating and improving Little Daisy for 15 years. Now, Pike was a very, very good businessman. I think we can all agree on that. But Pike wasn't all business, and that's what I'd like to focus on a little bit in the remainder of my talk. As I mentioned, Pike had built a number of boats for his business. He used them for a variety of purposes. They pulled log rafts to the mill. They shipped finished lumber to markets as distant as Buffalo, New York. And they delivered supplies to logging camps on the islands. The boats included the Mockingbird, the Maple Leaf, and the Favorite. But Pike did not use them only for business. On at least three occasions, one of his boats, towing as many as 4 barges, took a large number of Bayfielders out on the lake. For one of these trips, it was reported that everyone from a babe in arms to the gray-haired grandsire were represented. On another occasion, 600 people and the Harbor City Band were loaded onto the Favorite and the Gray Oak barge for a tour of the islands. The barge was trimmed with flags and evergreens. On June 28, 1878, the Mockingbird, with a party of men and women, went out to chase deer. The deer were driven into the water by dogs. The tug would then chase them down, and they successfully caught 2 deer. I believe they were trying to establish a deer park in Bayfield. And on various occasions, Nelly Tate noted that the boats were used to make it easier for a group to go out, maybe berrying, maybe fishing, or doing other things, because land transportation was often difficult. Next, Pike knew how to organize a great excursion. We'll talk about her more in detail later, but Nelly Tate was married to the druggist in town, and she kept a number of diaries that we have in our archives. I use the term excursion because that's what Nelly Tate called them, and because it would be insufficient to call it a party or even a slumber party. So let me tell you a little bit about one of these excursions. And I'm going to read a fair amount from what Nelly wrote. And what she was able to write was pretty limited because the diary didn't have a lot of space in it. But I'll tell you, if you're like me, you're going to hear about this excursion and you're going to say, God, I wish I could have done. Okay? All right. So this excursion took place February 8, 1872. Nelly wrote, "A lovely day, most charming for our excursion. About 11 of our party of 14 started with a 4-house team. The sleighing was grand on the ice. The shore was beautiful, robed in white, fleecy snow, and the frost and ice glittering on the rocks." Okay, not bad of a start. That night, she wrote, "We danced, played cards, talked, and laughed until 12. Then all retired to our beds on the floor." I think that's just great. Okay, the next morning, she wakes up and she writes this. "Awoke in the morning, much refreshed for the little sleep we got, and found the sun streaming through the window, and our party were all stirring, and such a babble of voices, and laughing, and so much confusion as ensued. But after we finished breakfast," this is my favorite part, "Corinne," which by the way was excellent, "they went off then to a trip to Fish Creek or to Ashland, and some of the people went fishing at Fish Creek. That night went the same way as the night before, dancing, playing cards, laughing. When she wrote about the ride home, Nelly wrote this. The ride home was charming, and everyone was delighted with the trip. Last night, we heard the wolves howling. They made the woods sing. I mean, what a great trip that was, huh? Okay. And there was another one that Nelly wrote about. This one took place on August 7th, 1878. This one was a 2-day excursion to Pike's Meadow. This time they camped in tents. I won't go into this one in detail, but let me assure you, they fished, and they had a lot of fun. The day before the excursion, the the Mockingbird took them all on a trip to see a lighthouse. About 3 weeks later, Nelly attended a corn bake on the beach, and she wrote, "Those who attended were indebted to Pike for the entertainment." Now, I've mentioned Nelly Tate a few times. Nelly gave a gift to Bayfield. Her diaries from 1872 and then 1876 to 1879 provides an extraordinary glimpse of one woman's life in Bayfield. I spoke at length about Nelly in my Scroll 3 presentation. So if you want details about Nelly and her life, you might want to review that video. I'll even do you a favor and tell you you could skip to about the 22nd minute if you want to avoid all the other things I talked about. But here I want to focus on her entries relating to R.D. Pike. First, I want to make a general comment. Throughout her diaries, Nelly refers to others formally, even her best friends. Her best friend, I think, was Mrs. Hayward. Always Mrs. Hayward, always Mr. Hayward. There are only 4 people that Nelly refers to by their first name. Her husband, Andrew, her daughter, Lillian, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Hayward, who also was Nelly's helper, Maddie, and R.D. Pike, whom she called Rob. I will note Eleanor Knight read Nelly's handwriting as Bob. And from what you said, maybe it was Bob, but I'm sticking with Rob. You know, the handwriting in her diary is really beautiful, but man, is it ambiguous with regard to capital R or capital B. But regardless, the use of Rob or Bob is noteworthy from 2 angles. First, from Nelly's perspective, she felt close enough to R.D. to refer to him in an informal, if not endeared, manner. From a broader perspective, in all my research, I never saw any reference to Pike other than R.D. or Captain. Clearly, they had a special relationship, one in which she was comfortable calling him Rob, and he was comfortable with Nelly calling him Rob. Nelly described Rob as being like a kind brother to her, and the diaries reveal that kindness. In her first diary in 1872, Nelly is revealed to be a smart, talented woman, about 26 years old, who was deeply depressed. I believe that a number of factors contributed to her depression. The restricted role that women in 1872 were expected to assume, the limited social, cultural, and intellectual opportunities that were then available in Bayfield, and unhappiness with her marriage to Andrew, who was 23 years her senior. Her comments about herself were often full of self-loathing and prayers that she should be a better woman. On January 14, she wrote, "I was feeling low-spirited tonight and dissatisfied with myself as usual. How I wished I was different." A couple of more examples. On March 4, Nelly wrote, "I wonder if anyone ever had a heavier perception of their imperfections than I have. I wish I could be different." On March 22nd, she writes, "I have been quite blue today, but that is nothing new. I am beginning to fairly hate myself." In 1872, there are 5 times more references to Rob than her husband Andrew. She reveled in Rob's visits, often noting that they had a nice chat. Nelly would make note of Rob's visit, even if it was only for a few minutes. They played whist, cribbage, and he taught her how to play 7-up. I believe that R.D. recognized the distress that Nelly was in, and that he made a conscious effort to help her get through her dark period. For example, on the same day that Nelly wrote that she fairly hated herself, she wrote, "Rob ran in after dinner, and we had a nice little chat. What a kind brother he is to me." On March 24, she writes, "Andrew gave me a good talking to. Perhaps I deserved it all, but God knows I try to do what is right." That same day, she notes, Rob went home to get her some liniment for her throat. On another occasion, Rob brought a delicacy to the Tate house, a tin of oysters, and Nelly noted that she, Andrew, and Rob enjoyed a nice social dish of oysters. And when she returned from that first excursion I talked about, she wrote, "Rob ran in for a minute in the evening, and we talked it over and enjoyed it almost as much as though we were going through it again." But what Nelly seemed to enjoy most, and we got a little glimpse of it when I talked about her entry about the excursion, she loved sleigh rides. I mean, she loved sleigh rides. Sleigh rides to visit R.D.'s father, on an excursion, to visit friends, or just to enjoy the winter scenery. Now, Nelly got through her dark period with, I believe, with R.D.'s help. And she was a happier woman in her subsequent diaries, at least for a while. She and R.D. continued to have nice chats, to fish, to ice skate, play cribbage, and whist together. In April 1879, a party line was established between Nelly Tate and her good friend, Mrs. Hayward. Nelly writes that the party line was installed by Mr. Whittlesey, who was a business associate of Mr. Pike. But I have to believe that Mr. Pike had something to do with the selection of Nelly Tate as one of the recipients of this party line. I do know that when she tried out the telephone on this party line the first time, she tried it out with Rob. And she wrote, "The telephone worked like a charm." Now, in 1879, Nelly became very ill with what I believe was tuberculosis. Her Christmas was somber. She wrote that she wondered if she would ever see another Christmas again. She said that she was surrounded by many sad faces. And she noted that she was unable to go to Christmas service. And that was significant. She was a very, very religious person who often talked about how much she enjoyed church services. Rob continued to be a kind brother to her. He took her for a sleigh ride on December 27th, the thing she loved most. Nelly died in 1880, I don't know when. But 1879 is the last time she kept a diary. But we know that she did take at least one more sleigh ride. Elmer Wright tells us about a discussion she had with a man named Paul Butterfield. Butterfield worked for Mr. Pike. And he recalled taking Nelly for a ride in Mr. Pike's cutter. The cutter is smaller than a sleigh, and it's intended to be used by two people, a little bit more cozy and comfortable. Mr. Pike drove the cutter to her home and carried her to the cutter. She was so weak. He drove for a while until she asked to go home because she was tired. He turned around, took her home, and carried her back into the house. In some, when you think of Pike, many images come to mind. Pike, the Civil War cavalryman, Pike, the owner of the smartest mill, the Little Daisy, Pike, the progressive who brought electricity and the telephone to Bayfield. But for me, when I think of Pike, I think of Nelly Tate. So that ends my formal presentation, but folks, I am not done. I know that this has been a special day, and it was the Pike Day, and that's a very good thing. But it still seemed to me that something was missing. And I can tell you, no one in this room was more glad to hear you enthusiastically say "whereas" than me. And you'll understand a little bit more as I go forward. Alexander Hamilton had a whole musical written about him, often in rap. And it seemed to me that RD should have at least one song. So I sat down with my friend ChatGPT to write this song. And we wrote lyrics for a song about RD. But for this to work, your participation is essential. So, I've styled my request to help set the mood. First, don't be self-conscious. It's not like you're nude. Be bold. Do your part. Join in the song. Sit there timid and quiet? Well, that would be wrong. Bayfield is our city. We should be proud. It's time to be heard. It's time to be loud. You'll want to be prepared. So here is the chorus to celebrate a man who lived here before us. Okay, so folks, you are, as shown at the bottom of the CD case, the original Broad Street cast. And you will join, I hope, in the chorus to this song. And here's the chorus. Pike was a brave man, earnest and zealous. Gave Bayfield cred, Washburn was jealous. The forest was vast, Pike's daisy of root. The huge trees are gone, now we have fruit. So, can we give it a try? And remember your work on whereas, okay? All right, 1, 2, 3.
Pike was a brave man, earnest and zealous. Gave Bayfield cred, Washburn was jealous. The forest was vast, like the daisy of root. The huge trees are gone, now we have fruit.
All right. I can honestly say that far exceeds my expectations. Okay. All right. So we're gonna give this a roll. Hold it there. But before I get started, I want to say one thing. This is supposed to be rap. And what I've learned is when a 67-year-old white guy does rap, it sounds a lot like Dr. Zeus. So just bear with me on this, all right? But keep that enthusiasm going. All right, so here we go. In Bayfield, Wisconsin, where Elijah Pike came, there once stood a lumber mill with a strange name. The Little Daisy, where dreams came alive, a place of hard work that helped Bayfield thrive. Owned by R.D. Pike, a visionary of might, bringing progress and change, the future looked bright. Pike brought telephone lines and lights electric, made Bayfielders' lives a little less hectic.
Pike was a brave man, earnest and zealous, gave Bayfield credit, watched where it was jealous.
The forest was vast,
Pike's daisy a root.
the youth was gone,
Now we have fruit.
towering white pines and other big trees, Daisy cut to size with dispatch MEs, worked all day and night with axes, saws, and some automation, produced huge stacks of lumber that build up our nation. R.D.'s Pike energy fueled Bayfield's spirit. The town was alive. Everyone could hear it. I know this may sound too good to be true, but those who lived then, they certainly knew.
Pike was a brave man, earnest and zealous, gave Bayfield credit, Washburn was jealous.
The
Forest
forest
was vast, Pike's daisy a root.
the
Huge trees are gone, now we have fruit.
Time marches on, I'm sure you're aware. Little Daisy is gone. It's now Ace Hardware. The memory lives, though the land does not show it, because history does not die, provided we know it. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. That's true for the locals. It's true for the tourists. Now let's toast R.D. with wine or cold beer. I think he'd choose Spotted Cow if he was staying. All right, well, that's it for me. So let's go celebrate.